Hello health champions, today I want to talk about 10 so-called keto foods that might actually knock you out of ketosis. Coming right up. Hey, I'm Dr. Ekberg. I'm a holistic doctor and a former Olympic decathlete. And if you want to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. Some of the basic features of keto is that it's about fat adaptation. If we eat a bunch of carbs, the body gets dependent on carbs and it forgets how to burn the fat, and then the carbs drive a bunch of insulin and all the fats get stored, and now we can't burn it and we gain weight and we get diabetes and so forth. So the way that keto diets work is that by reducing the carbs low enough, the body eventually learns to burn fat, so we get fat adapted again. And now that we eat more fat and less sugar, now we're getting more satisfied. We get full longer and we end up eating fewer meals, and when we eat fewer meals, we end up consuming less food overall. And that's the whole goal. But we don't want to starve. We want to be satisfied in doing that, and that's exactly what the ketogenic diet does. A ketogenic diet is going to mean different things to different people, but in rough numbers, we're talking about the percentage of calories, not the percentage of grams of food, but the percentage of calories coming about 80% from fat, 15% from protein, and about 5% from carbohydrates. And that's net carbs. That means you take the total amount of carbohydrate in the food, you subtract the fiber because we don't utilize it for fuel, it doesn't affect blood sugar, and then we end up with about 25 grams of net carbs. And that's a very strict version of keto. A lot of people are going to be in keto if they back off. They're not quite that strict, and they go 70% of calories from fat, 20 from protein, and 10 from carbohydrate, and they're still going to be in ketosis. So this is not like a black and white. It's not the same for everybody, and that's where we need to understand some mechanisms and some principles so we can figure out where we fit. So in the second case here, our budget, our allowed amount of carbohydrate would be 50 grams a day. So how does that budget work? Well, then you have to add up, you have to kind of weigh or figure out, at least in the beginning, what your budget is. So let's say that you have 4 eggs, and most people think of eggs, well, that's animal food that has 0 carbs. Well, not quite. An egg has about 0.7 grams of carbs. It's in the egg yolk. So if you have 4 eggs in a day, that's 2.8 grams of carbs. If you eat 2 ounces of blueberries, that's 5.6. If you have 2 ounces of heavy cream, that's 1.7. 3 ounces of almonds is 8.1. 4 ounces of cabbage, 3.9. 2 ounces of kale is 2.7, and so on. And then you add up all of that, and in this particular case, we get 24.8. And the numbers just happen to come out that way, I promise. But if someone was shooting to go under 25 grams, then this food would allow them to do that. But often people talk about being in ketosis or out of ketosis, being knocked out of ketosis. But it's more a matter of degrees. It's a gradual scale. We're not really in or out. We have a certain amount. We have more or less ketosis going on. So we're going to have more ketosis in the morning, for example, when we haven't eaten during the night. We're going to have more ketosis after a workout. All right, so no ketosis is generally considered less than 0.5 millimoles of ketones per liter if you measure it with a blood stick. Now, light nutritional ketosis, that's when you start getting into keto, is between 0.5 and 1. This is where a lot of people are going to get tremendous health benefits. Moderate ketosis is between 1 and 2, and this is if you need to be a little bit more aggressive in reversing insulin resistance or some underlying condition. If you're exercising, then after exercise you're probably going to have more ketones because you burn some fat. So again, different for different people, maybe between 2 and 4. And if you're fasting long term, like if you go on a fast more than 24 hours, now you're going to start getting higher numbers. So typically if you fast for 5 days or a week, most people are going to fall between 3 to 6. You typically don't want to get much above that. Ketoacidosis, that's a disease. That's for people who have no insulin and now they're burning fat because they can't use sugar at all. There is no insulin to take the blood sugar out of the bloodstream, so they're burning fat. So what you're going to find on these people, if you do a blood test, is their ketones are going to be high, but they're also going to have sky-high glucose. And that's not going to happen unless you have a disease where you're lacking insulin. For most people who are insulin resistant, they're not going to have that issue, and you're going to find yourself somewhere in the fasting to no ketosis range. Next, let's look at food labeling, because someone claimed that half and half had 0 carbs. That's what the package said. How can that be? As we all know that dairy products have lactose, which is a sugar. And half and half actually has about 4.6% carbs. And when we round that down, we round it to the nearest even number, we get 5. A typical serving, it's going to vary depending on the manufacturer, but oftentimes they say that a serving is 2 tablespoons, which would be 1.4 grams of sugar or lactose or carb. And when we round that, we get 1. However, other manufacturers might claim that a serving is 1 tablespoon, and then you're going to get half of that, 0.69 grams. But look now, that's also going to be rounded to 1. So according to the package, even though we take twice as much in one case, it has the same amount because of such great rounding errors. But now, let's take it one step further. Let's say someone wanted to make it look like they had very, very little carbs or 0. What if we take a serving to be 2 teaspoons? Now we get 0.46 grams of carbs, and when we round it, it's 0. So now somebody buys that package and they look and it says 0 carbohydrates, perfect ketogenic food. And because they normally drink milk and half is much tastier, and you know that on a keto diet you can have lots of fat, they went on to drink a whole quart or 4 cups on a regular basis. So now they had 42 grams of sugar in their diet from a package that said it had 0. So we need to understand some of these principles. We need to start understanding which foods have what. Because when they round things down, when something is a 0 or a 1, then that gives us very, very little information. If you read the food label and it has 0 or 1, you really don't know what's going on there. That's why you want to get some sense of how many percent of carbs or sugar or fat or protein is in a food, and then you start getting a sense of what that means. So we need to be aware of this when we're looking at a food label and the numbers start getting very low, down to 1 or 0, then there's huge rounding errors involved, and that 0 or a 1 really doesn't tell us much of anything. So we much rather would want to learn approximately how many percent of sugar or carbs or fat or protein is in a food, because then we can start getting a sense of how it applies to us. Let's jump into the top 10 foods that a lot of people think are keto foods, but that might actually knock you out of ketosis, that might sabotage your results. And for some of you, you might go, oh, well, I know these may not be such good keto foods, But this is what a lot of people believe, and this is what I hear a lot of questions about. So there may be a few surprises in here for you. And the first surprise for most people is liver. Liver is considered a meat product, and almost every kind of meat product has exactly zero sugar, zero carbohydrate. Well, the liver actually stores some glycogen. So on the food lists, liver has about 4% carbohydrate. Muscle technically could have a trace of carbohydrate, but it's going to be much, much less, and it is rounded to zero. I mean, it's minuscule if there's any at all. But liver can have 4% carbs, and if a serving is 6 ounces, then you could actually get 7 grams of carbs in a serving of something that you thought had 0 carbs. And again, if you think about your carb budget, for someone who is sort of sensitive to carbs, for someone who has to be really super strict, then that 7 grams could knock you way over your limit and sabotage your results. Another favorite keto snack is beef jerky. They're selling it everywhere, and they're saying, look, this is the perfect keto food. It's paleo-friendly, and it's grass-fed organic. It's a superfood, perfect for keto. But then they soak this thing in syrup, in honey, or in some form of sugar product, to the point where it can have 25% sugar. I kid you not. I've seen lots and lots of examples of that. And if you eat a 2-ounce serving, which isn't very much, it's a couple of 3 pieces, you could have 15 grams of sugar from something that you would think is a meat product. Number 8 way to sabotage your ketosis is sweet dressing. So you have your salad, you're so proud of yourself, you have a steak salad or a tuna salad, and then you love that honey mustard dressing, which can have 23% carbohydrate. Almost a quarter of that bottle is pure sugar. And you know, you go to a restaurant and they give you that little package of dressing, and there's hardly ever enough, so you ask for 2. Well, 2 of those packages is 3 ounces, so now you got 20 grams of sugar on top of your salad. And if you're out traveling and you know that you don't want to eat the candy from the gas station or the convenience store, but they did have some nuts, and you love honey roasted peanuts, well, they can have 20% sugar, 20% carbohydrate. Part of that is in the nuts and part of it is added. So 1 little bag is usually 2 ounces, and when it's sweet and addictive, you can't have just 1. So 4 ounces of peanuts is not a whole lot. It goes down pretty quick. That's 24 grams of carbohydrate. Definitely enough to knock you. That's almost the entire budget of carbs for a lot of people who need to be strict. And then we hear that dark chocolate is okay on keto, but some people, they don't look so closely at the label. They just said, oh yeah, it was dark chocolate. But dark chocolate usually starts around 50%. So if they don't tell you how dark it is, it's usually 50%. And if it's 50% cocoa in the chocolate, that means the other 50% is sugar. And then there's some naturally occurring carbohydrate in there as well. So you get 55% carbs. 50% of that is sugar in what's called dark chocolate. And this is not what we talk about when we say dark chocolate. With keto, we don't even begin to talk dark chocolate until it's at least 70%. I think 78 is kind of the bottom level, and 85 is where you can really start to feel safe about it. But the 50% dark chocolate, if a serving is 1.5 ounces, that's like a third of a bar, 40% of a bar, like they usually call a serving, then that's 24 grams of carbs, mostly sugar. And some people, keto is just fried chicken and bacon, but some people also know that you can have some vegetables, but they're not totally clear on what those vegetables are. And a lot of people think that corn is a vegetable, which it is not. Corn is a grain. It's a relatively high water content grain, but it's still a grain, and it has 17% carbs. Corn is also very easy to eat because it has lots of water, so 6 ounces go down pretty quick, and that's 30 grams of carbohydrate. There's a reason, you know, they make corn syrup out of corn. Number 4 way to ruin your ketosis is sweet potato. And most people would know that this is a very starchy food, but I want to clarify, because a lot of people are told that they can't eat potato on a paleo diet because potato is not paleo, but sweet potato is okay on a paleo diet, which is true, but it's not okay on a keto diet. So sweet potato, 17% carbs, a 6-ounce serving will get you 30 grams and pretty much guaranteed to knock you out of ketosis. Number 3 way to ruin your ketosis is cashews. So if you didn't fall for the honey roasted peanuts, you knew that the peanuts had sugar on them and you wanted to go natural unsweetened, so you went for the cashews. Well, cashews have 27% carbs. That's why they're so addictive. They're so easy to eat a lot because the sugar and the carbs are built in. You don't have to sweeten them. A 4-ounce serving, again, 2 of those little bags at the gas station, is 32 grams of carbs. Not to mention the people who buy the can, the big super jar at Costco and start eating and don't really measure how much they're getting. They could get many, many times that much. Number 2, now we fire up the barbecue because we know meat is definitely okay. If we stick with beef and pork and things like that, they have no sugar. But we like to have a little bit of barbecue sauce or steak sauce or some condiment on there. And they can vary greatly, but here's one that I found, barbecue sauce, 41% sugar in that. So almost half of that sauce is syrup. And they probably will tell you that a serving is 1 or 2 tablespoons, but seriously, that's like that much. Who uses that? I would think most people probably use 2 or 3 ounces worth of barbecue sauce for a party, for a meal, and then you get 36 grams of carbs, all of which is pure sugar. And the number 1 way to ruin your ketosis is fried chicken. A lot of people, again, they think it's about fried meat and bacon and fat, and as long as it's fried, it's mostly fat. Well, that's not true because fried chicken has 18% carbohydrate, and even just 2 little pieces, like 2 drumsticks, would be 8 ounces, give you 43 grams of carbohydrate. You might as well have a couple of pieces of bread. And I'm well aware that not everyone would eat this exact serving size, but I just figured these were pretty typical for what people probably eat. So understand that it's all about how much you eat. The poison is in the dosage, right? So some of these things might be perfectly okay if you have just a tiny little bit. Like if you know how to control yourself and you just have 3 of those peanuts, then not a problem. Now, don't drive yourself crazy. Don't overanalyze. Don't think that you have to measure everything and figure out every gram and every milligram, all right? Just know enough. You want to learn enough principles. You want to learn enough about food that you know what's basically in that stuff. And you don't have to learn it all at once. You just need to learn enough that you don't get taken advantage of. If someone says that half and half has 0 carbohydrates, you know better because dairy products have sugar. And then as you go, you measure as needed. You measure the amount of food, you weigh it, the amount of grams, the amount of tablespoons, etc. But you don't have to measure everything. You just have to measure for a while until you get the hang of it. And then you measure some blood glucose to see how you respond, and then you measure some ketones to see where you are. And you don't have to do this all the time, but it's really fun to see how the numbers change, and then you start to see the bigger picture, and most importantly, you start understanding how it works for you, because we're all different. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you also take a look at that one. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.